Hi, everyone. Welcome again to SBR.TV. I'm Peter Loshak, and today we're going to continue talking about betting the early weeks in college and pro football with SBR moderator and professional handicapper Justin Seven. Justin?
Good morning, Peter.
So how's the first 2 weeks been in college football for you? Have you been betting a lot? You've been winning?
Very small bets. Nothing real, mainly just scalps and arbitrage.
Okay, so you didn't take any big positions on any games the first 2 weeks?
Actually, I had some moderate positions on a couple college teasers. I think I had Wisconsin and Navy on teasers last week, and they both won.
Okay, first question. Now that we've got these 2 weeks of games under our belts in college football, what general things can we take from them? What kinds of things can we look for, from the results of the past 2 weeks that might shed some light on some line value for week 3?
It's a very dangerous time of the year because you now have 2 weeks of games, 2 weeks of stats, which is not really enough to tell you anything because you're going to have huge variability. So people who put too much weight into stats at this point will tend to get buried. But one thing you can look for are teams that in college are teams that have had a lot of turnovers, especially fumbles. Teams that have had a lot of fumbles are likely to overperform going forward.
Yeah, so aren't there any stats that you can look at from weeks 1 and 2 where if you see that they're extreme in some way, you can say, either that's a fluky result that's due to variance or it's indicative of something real that might not be being taken into account in the line yet, something that later on in the year might become pretty clear. And, something you might be able to use to identify a situation where it would be worth it to bet that it's real and not anomalous.
Yes, and the one thing I would look the closest at is, well, there's two things actually. First, I would look at yards per rushing attempt. That will tell you more than probably any other statistic. If you have a team that's consistently rushing for 5 yards a rush, and that's not just one big break, but if they run the ball 30 times and the median is at least 4, this team is offensively a good threat. So if you have a team that has rushed the ball well but doesn't put up a lot of points in the first week or two, that team has underperformed and might be good to play going forward. Another thing, on the same line, if you have a team that had a lot of yards put up, if a team puts up 400 yards and only has 20 points, that score is not reflective of their offense. And the counterpoint is true. If a team allowed 400 yards, but only their defense only gave up 20 points, that team looks better on the score than it is statistically.
All right, so listen. So let's talk about some of the top 25 games coming up that caught my eye that I wanted to get your take on. The first game that I want to ask you about is Florida State at BYU. Now, BYU is a 7.5-point home favorite. Florida State has not shown much this year. They've got a home loss, and then they had a home win where they struggled to beat a Division 1 AA team. BYU, of course, had a road win over number 3 Oklahoma in Week 1, and then a road blowout over Tulane. And BYU has a pretty strong home edge in general. So it seems like 7.5 might be a bit of a low line here, especially maybe if you're thinking about using it in a teaser. What do you think about that?
Well, first I'm going to talk about your teaser bet. The total in this game is 56. Now, a lot of times, big home favorites, that is, like 7 to 9 point home favorites are good teasers in college, but only when the totals are lower. If this total were, for example, 44 or less, I would probably tease BYU. But at a total of 56, the value you're getting from those 6 points isn't high enough, in my opinion, to justify a tease.
So taking BYU on the spread or the money line would be preferable to a teaser?
That's correct. I would rather bet BYU straight up than on a tease in this situation.
Okay, well, what are your thoughts on this game in general then?
There's a couple conflicting things going through my head. The first thing you hear, when you hear Florida State is a 7.5-point underdog, they're a great team. They have a history, they have a tradition, and that's what the public is going to think. So I suspect Florida State will be a public team, which makes me like BYU a little bit more than I otherwise would. You look at their game against BYU's game against Oklahoma, they actually had a -2 turnover differential. So not only did they beat Oklahoma, they did it giving up the ball an extra 2 times. Florida State, on the other hand, don't be misled by what looks like mediocre performances. They put up 500 yards of offense against Miami. Against Jacksonville State, where they struggled, they had 3 lost fumbles. But the one problem they had against both Miami and Jacksonville State was poor rushing. They only averaged 3.7 yards a rush against Miami and only 3 yards a rush against Jacksonville State. BYU doesn't run the ball very well, but they're a good passing team. Given this, I think, I thought the fair line on this matchup was BYU by about 10, so I definitely lean towards BYU at 7.5.
Good. So you're agreeing with my assessment that there's some value here with BYU.
This one time, yes, Peter, I agree with you.
All right, excellent. That's good to hear. Okay, on to the next game where there was actually some late news last night that might change things a bit. USC minus 20.5 at Washington. And just to review some of the issues of note for this game, obviously USC is a great team. They're ranked third, and they're coming off of a high-profile close win over Ohio State. Last year, they beat Ohio State and then lost their next game outright. Washington just broke a long losing streak with a win last week, and then before that, they hung tough at home, losing to 9th-ranked LSU by 8. So my first thoughts here were that Washington has value. I did already bet this. I got them at 21. USC is obviously a much better team, but it's just hard for me to justify them as a 3-touchdown road favorite, especially with the injury issues that they're having. But even without that stuff, Washington has an experienced quarterback in Jake Locker. I'm just not buying it. I'm kind of liking Washington plus 21 or 20.5.
Well, if you got plus 21, you clearly got a good number. My general impressions, though, Pac-10 matchup. Anything can happen. If you look at the variability, that is how close, USC, they tend to sometimes just rout teams. Sometimes they unexpectedly choke. What was it, last year when they lost to Stanford as a 41-point, was that last year or 2 years ago when USC lost? Yeah, 41-point favorite and they blow it. Washington, they're no cakewalk. They could show up and put a fight, or USC could execute and just rout anyone. I really can't tell what's going to happen. So I'm kind of intimidated by this game. But if you got them at plus 20, if you got Washington at plus 21, you clearly have the best of it. I
definitely got them at plus 21. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to stick with that bet. Another issue, though, is with USC is that their special teams were really bad last week. Now, if you see a team in the early weeks in college football with horrible special teams in 1 week, is that something you would expect to continue, or do you expect that to change?
I would expect Coach Carroll to get his special teams in line in a hurry. I would not expect that to repeat this week.
Okay. All right. And then the third game I want to ask you about was a game that sort of jumped out at me, which is sort of a scenario you run into a lot, and I want to get your take on it. It's Oklahoma State minus 31.5 at home over Rice. Oklahoma State is, of course, coming off their quote-unquote shocking loss to Houston last week. Now they're coming up against a team that they're just way, way better than. And Rice, it seems like they'll be able to name the score if they want to. The game after Rice is Grambling State, so it's not like Oklahoma State has a big game coming up the next week. And again, the 31.5-point favorites. Rice lost to UAB by 20, and then they lost to Texas Tech by 45 the next week, so they can clearly get blown out at this level. And you do see this a lot, this kind of situation a lot. Oklahoma State, a great team, off of a surprise loss, facing a terrible team as a huge home favorite. So is Oklahoma State a good bet here on the idea that they'll be looking to atone for their loss last week and just run up the score?
I don't normally like laying that many points, but in this case, yes, I do. This is a game. Earlier, we were talking about teams that have had fluky things that tend to make them look worse than they are. If you look at Oklahoma State's game against Houston, they gave up 3 fumbles, and they gave up a pick 6. You put these things together, they ended up losing a game that they probably should have won. You're right in that they're going to be able to name the score in this matchup. And I would expect Oklahoma State to pay a little bit more attention to defense, hold Rice to under 14 points. I'd see this game being something like 52-14. So I think laying the 31.5, or actually I think the line's up to 32 now, is a good play.
Okay, excellent. That's good to think about. Well, those were the 3 games that I wanted to know about. Are there any others, top 25 or otherwise, that caught your attention this week?
Well, I'm always looking at Notre Dame games. And I was a little bit surprised. They opened up as a 12-point favorite against Michigan State. That line has dropped all the way down to 10 to a Michigan State team that really hasn't been tested yet. Again, you look at statistics. Notre Dame lost last week in a game that I think they actually outplayed Michigan. So I would definitely lean towards Notre Dame versus Michigan State, but I'd wait till game day, or at least wait till Friday, because the line's still dropping.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Excellent. You ready to talk about NFL next?
Let's do NFL.
Okay, there you go, SBR, some Week 3 college football analysis. We're going to be doing the same thing for Week 2 of NFL, so look for that right here on SBR.TV. For SBR.TV, I'm Peter Loshak.